Welcome to Cut the Bull, an insightful podcast which addresses the news of the day and the cultural issues plaguing our society, bringing logic and context to these topics and discussing solutions too real for mainstream pundits. Now, here are your hosts, Charles Love, Shamika Michelle, and Wilfred Riley.
Hello and welcome to Cut the Bull. I am Charles Love alongside my co-host, Wilfred Riley. Shamika Michelle is coming shortly. She's having some technical difficulties. And our guest this week is Karol Markowicz. She is a columnist for the New York Post and Fox News, contributing editor at the Spectator, and contributing writer with the Washington Exaaminer. Karol, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
It is good to have you. You know, I reached out to you a while back, schedules and a lot of changes happened since that time. And said, we'll just talk about whatever's timely in the news. And unfortunately, the things that are timely outside of the Ukraine haven't really changed much.
Yeah.
And we've talked about COVID on the show in different phases. At the beginning, we talked about it in the middle, looking back and what have we learned. Mm-hmm. And now I think that you have a unique take because a lot of it's going to be the effects on the kids. I think you can bring a great perspective on that. And I wanted, your story is particularly interesting. You wrote an article about it, so it's no secret, but I've talked before on the show about how I recently moved to New York, and I moved just before COVID started, so I didn't know anything or anyone. And as I started to follow people who were in New York, who were writing and speaking about New York, you and David Marcus were two of the first ones that I saw. And you would write and post these pictures, right? And you would have pictures of the Brooklyn Bridge and pictures of being out on the New York scene. And it was just all this love for New York. Like, New York's my home. Yeah. New York is my place. It was so pro New York, like New York through and through. So to see you write that article about how you were leaving New York and moving to Florida was a bit of a shock. And you can't say, people can't say you were doing it because you were just, passing through and you didn't like New York.
Right.
So
no.
About how hard that was and what made you decide to move.
Yeah. So, I get all these comments like, oh, you moved because of the weather or the taxes. And look, it's great. No state income tax in Florida. That's fantastic. But honestly, I loved New York. I love New York. I always jokingly refer to myself as a New York supremacist. Like, yeah, other cities are fine, but like New York, and in a lot of ways, I still feel so strongly about it, and I still love New York, and I root for it, and I hope that it recovers. But I had to get my kids out because it had gone down a really crazy path, and I didn't see them coming back from that path, and I might have stayed with my husband if it was just the two of us and waited it out. But childhood is short, and I couldn't keep doing that to my children. And it was really sad. It was really hard. We're very close with our families, and it was very tough leaving it behind. We had moved into our dream house in March of 2020, and we had suffered for that house. Like we lived in a tiny apartment. We had to move twice. It was just a lot. And to leave it all behind was not an easy call, but we had to do it for the kids.
Wow, and you didn't even really have any time there. I mean, you went through those sacrifices to live in your dream home in the city you loved, and got a few weeks, well, I guess technically a few months, but still, you got little enjoyment. You still decided to walk away. So was it the COVID restrictions, or was it the school, or what? What was it?
So it was the kind of the last straw was the ongoing COVID restrictions. But really, what happened was that during 2020, when schools didn't open in New York City, my husband and I couldn't unsee what we saw. We couldn't unsee that people did not care about schools. They didn't care about their neighbors. All previous kind of challenges to New York, 9/11, there was this blackout in 2003 that was really kind of scary because it was only 2 years after 9/11. But we all came together, Hurricane Sandy, we helped each other. This was something completely different. I lived in Park Slope, which is a very left area. So when there were the equity marches in summer of 2020, my neighbors were front and center at those marches. I lived in the neighborhood that was 100% into equity. We're going to make sure that the world is equitable for everybody. And then schools didn't open. And what we saw was that our neighbors, so actually public schools didn't open. Private schools did open. And what was crazy about it was I was like, well, when public schools don't open, but private schools open, that's when the parents are going to rise up. But that's when my neighbors are going to say, this is crazy. How could private schools be open, but public schools aren't open? And nobody said a word. And if you did say a word, you wanted teachers to die. And it was such a tough moment where I watched my neighborhood, which is fairly wealthy. They got their kids tutors, they formed pods, they sent their kids to private school, they moved to like their summer house and sent their kids to public school there where it was open, and they didn't fight for equity whatsoever. And it was so hard to watch these people not kind of mount the argument, at least, for school choice, for vouchers, like, okay, the public schools aren't opening, give us our money back so that we can do what you're doing, basically. And they absolutely towed the leftist line, and they wouldn't get off of it, and there was no way to even make the argument. And I wrote about it over and over and over again in 2020, and I had all these people reach out to me and say, I agree with you. I agree with you. Schools should be open. I can't speak out because I'm going to be targeted. And it was really just hard to live in a place where A, you'd be targeted, but B, where you wouldn't stand up for your kids, even if you would get targeted. So all of that was really hard to swallow. And so I'm a lifelong New Yorker. My husband's a lifelong New Yorker. When schools did reopen in 2021, we saw that normalcy was never going to come back, or not for a very, very long time. And again, childhood is short. We couldn't keep doing this to our kids. They had been suspended in this insanity for so long, and they're the lowest risk population when it comes to COVID. And it's like, you see these like elderly people dining, in restaurants around the city and going to museums or like doing things, and kids are like masked for 8 hours a day, and there's no moving forward. So we had to go, and it was hard, and it still is hard, and we had to do it anyway.
So, Shamika, you have a kid in school, and you had to go through that. I mean, not as young, but we'll get to how that's different based on where you are. You're in a different place. We talked before about how it was a fallacy to say that we were all in this together, because it didn't affect everybody the same. I know Will was fortunate enough to be somewhere where it wasn't really that extreme, and I have some experiences of both. I got the rare situation to be in the extreme of COVID mania, the mass, what do I call them, the mandate morons, and being in freedom. So I get to see the extremes. But Shamika, what was it like for you with a kid in school dealing with COVID? And you're on mute. You're on mute.
Yeah, so for me, what was frustrating is because my daughter that's in college now missed her senior year, or a lot of her, as far as like homecoming, prom, graduation was limited, and that was very frustrating because everybody loves their senior year. There's so many activities that you get to do, and she missed it all. My daughter that's a junior now, she only got to go to ninth grade half of a year. And then she missed the rest of ninth grade, all of 10th grade. And now she's back in school for the 11th grade, but she's in an early college program. Mm-hmm. So high school is gone. She's only taking college classes now.
Yeah.
So I'm very upset about, especially my daughter that missed her senior year as a basketball player. That was trash. And so, just sports just ruined. I'll never forgive them for my daughter never being able to, say she went to the prom, never being able to say she experienced homecoming, senior spirit week. She never got a chance to do that, and I'll never forgive them for that. Yeah. I think if my children were really young, first of all, if I wasn't able to move, so I applaud you for actually moving. I think if I wasn't able to move, I probably would have just pulled them out of school, period. Not only because of COVID, but because of what we see going on with gender and, sexual orientation and all of this foolishness. I would probably pull my kids out because education, it has just changed and it doesn't even feel safe anymore. I was happy to see as I was driving down the freeway today, someone put a big sign up on one of the bridges that said, "Unmask our children." That was the first time I've ever seen anything in this city where it seems like parents are actually getting frustrated and tired, because for me, I'm grateful that my children are old enough to, either go without their mask or pull it down and, but for these kids that are actually stuck in classrooms all day for 8 hours, I would be livid.
Yeah.
And Will, to speak a little bit to what you see, I mean, could you kind of mix it up on Twitter and talk to people, but Shanika talking about that billboard, and earlier Karol talked about how her neighbors in a very affluent and liberal neighborhood talked about equity, but remained silent. But I think it's even worse. It's not that they remained silent. They were openly give the teachers whatever they want. If the teachers aren't afraid to go back, then shut up and deal with it, as if your trade-offs don't matter, only the teachers. So, I mean, you mix it up with these people. So what did you notice by the way it was approached by people who like equity but don't?
Yeah, Charles, I mean, we've talked about this before, but I mean, I think this was openly absurd. The extreme COVID lockdown policies in the urban blue states are one of the most ridiculous things I've ever seen. The average victim of COVID, we obviously want to protect every human being, but was 81 years of age. And we saw that some of the European countries were able to prevent a huge chunk of deaths, Germany, by doing things like having nursing home workers work in shifts. The total, so you might have people in the facility for a week, something like this. I don't want to exaggerate the efficacy of that, but I mean, this is concentrated among a very specific demographic of very old people. The total number of kids during the entire pandemic, 2 years, that died of COVID was around 700. So to me, this is insane to the point of being almost anti-evolutionary. Freedom itself also has a value. So if you say we're going to take every single child in the country and prevent everything from them breathing the air in springtime in the 5th grade to their first high school love affair for 2 years so we can boost the life expectancy of people in their 80s by a week, and you are an amoral murderer if you oppose that, I mean, I think that was just obviously nonsensical. And at least you could have a moral debate if there was proof that was the case, that was true. But I think, I mean, I've read some of Karol's writing, and a lot of it's pretty empirical. And I've written about this. I wrote a pretty major piece about this for Spiked that we submitted to some medical journals, actually, or at least prepped for that market. That's really very debatable. I mean, Johns Hopkins just conducted a study and found that lockdowns, as versus NPI, like wear your mask around seniors, cancel large events, the stuff we all agreed on, reduced the death rate by something like 0.4%. So, I mean, to me, this was insane. This was just panic. And it was inspired by predictions like Neil Ferguson's over in the UK, not to wonk out too much, but they were just openly wrong. I mean, his argument, if you recall, was that 2 million people in the UK and 550,000, or 2 million people in the USA, and 550,000 in the UK would die by something like August of 2020. The IFR for COVID in his modeling was fully 1%, so on down the line. So I think that this was an extreme, over-the-top reaction. And part of my perspective comes from living. I mean, you tease me a little bit like you're out there in free America. And it's sort of true. I mean, Louisville is a great city, but obviously there are fewer amenities in terms of the theater or something like that than there are in New York. But also as a mid-sized heartland city, we never really did much of this. I mean, in Kentucky, we've been back open to at least a reasonable degree for probably the past 19 months. I mean, people were wearing light cloth masks through the end of summer 2020. But it's really remarkable when I travel on business to places like LA, and I see that there are places that are still doing this, that are checking vaccine cards when you walk into restaurants, or the kids are eating outside in the rain, this kind of stuff. We never did any of that. And we're not leading the country in terms of COVID deaths. I mean, again, you watch the large events, you protect seniors, and that's sort of 80-20 principle stuff. I mean, that's most of what keeps the death count down. And last comment, but there's been a sort of a natural experiment running in terms of this since the beginning of COVID-19. I mean, Sweden decided to do essentially what I'm describing. They decided to follow GB declaration principles, if you will. Florida in the USA decided to do this. Large heartland states, Kentucky, Iowa, decided to do this. So it's not like this is wild, untested stuff. The mass media, except for the Post, except for the Journal sometimes, but has really just been ignoring this. There's been almost the presentation of this as some kind of mystery. Like, why aren't there corpses on the street in Death Santis's Florida? Mm-hmm. You know, I still read the mainstream center-left media. I'm an educated guy. The Atlantic, I think, was the journal that published the South's experiment in human sacrifice, referring to Georgia. Georgia's doing better than probably a third plus of the states in the country. So, to me, as both empiricist and person who lives in a state where you can go hunting and take your mask off, this to me was an insane reaction. And it's interesting watching Carol and other casual friends and acquaintances from the blue states move. I mean, I think, of course, objectively, I'm from Chicago, so I can trade insults back and forth with, New York or a few other cities, Miami. But, I mean, obviously Chicago has some amenities Louisville doesn't. Obviously, I like my hometown a great deal. But I'm very, very glad the past couple of years that I haven't been living there. The crime, the protests, the needles on the street, even in a fairly well-run city. I mean, the COVID panic. So you're starting to see this outflux of people that are just normal urbanites that don't hate the city, that would not seek the suburbs, just because things don't work. And that's it. That's my take. The overreaction in terms of both the reaction to what sometimes are legitimate police brutality questions and the overreaction to COVID driving mass numbers of people out of the city. That's why you're seeing populations in cities drop by 3%, 4%, armed conflict level stuff. I think Carol's done one of the best jobs of summing that up, but I don't have a question. I think we just see it. That's the data. You can go to Zogby. It is what it is. Go to Zillow. Look at where the houses are being sold or they're being bought, and we see where they're being sold.
Yeah.
But Carol, you can react to that if you want to.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that, Fred's point about how, our original estimates were so deeply off and all of that. But the crazy thing to me is that it's now end of February 2022, and they still behave as if those estimates can come true at any moment. Kids in New York City today are masking in schools outside. Who's still masking outside?
Well, Carol, it's been a while. Let me help you out because you moved to Florida. So it's been a while since you've been in New York. People in New York are still masking outside.
People are voluntarily, maybe masking outside. But the fact that kids on a playground during recess in New York City, in public schools, of course, only in public schools, because the private schools just, some sort of different health profile. But the kids in the public schools are still masking outdoors.
Rich people don't die. It's a medical fact.
He said rich people don't die.
Right.
They don't die.
Right.
But
so, it just, when I tell people that, it sounds like I'm giving a report from Mars, in Florida, they're like, are you serious? But it's like everybody here is like, are you crazy? Why would you mask outside? Left, right, everybody. Everybody understands that masking outside is Looney Tunes.
Well, that's an important point you say about, perception. So I'm in South Carolina now, so I'm back with normal people. And so I'm having lunch with someone. And, South Carolina, and I started to explain this to somebody because, like you said, she didn't get it. She's like, what's happening in New York? I said, people still masking. She's like, what do you mean? I was like, I don't understand why. I said, what I'm finding is, and I didn't think about it until I'm, watching the landscape because I'm in South Carolina, but I'm in Charleston. And Charleston's not, diehard red, not the city. The city's probably 55 to 45, 60-40 Democrat. So I think I've seen 3 masks since I've been here. I've been here almost a week. So what I think is, it's because the people in these blue areas, LA, Chicago, New York, see that South Carolina is a red state. So they'll say these red state governors and these red state people are killing people, right? So they see the state as red, so everybody in the state is red, right? So they were making it political, but I'm like, if the city's 60-40 Democrat, and I haven't seen a mask, I'm assuming that the Democrats are walking around all over, not just outside, inside, outside, restaurants, bar, everything without a mask. It's completely normal. But for some reason, they think that. So in their minds, well, that's like that because that's those right-wing people who want to kill everybody. But everyone's going around without a mask. And she couldn't believe that people in New York are voluntarily riding their bikes or, you know, walking down the street with masks on. And I don't know when it's going to end, but I know that it's going to be difficult to get the kids. We'll get back to the kids briefly, but it's going to be difficult to get the kids out of masks when normal people are going to say, you know, because the argument has been, but look at the Super Bowl. Everybody's not wearing masks. Look at these people. But if the normal people in New York are like, but I'm wearing a mask, I don't see what the big deal is. I mean, they ended the mask mandate, and I'm on an elevator, and the door opened, the woman was like, oh, I'm going to have to catch the next one.
One thing here also is that people seem to have gone in 2 directions. So I went to LA recently to film a video, and I noticed a lot of people outdoors weren't just wearing masks, they were wearing N95s. And I'm a reasonably personable guy, and I asked somebody about this. And they said, well, with Omicron, you know, an ordinary mask does not necessarily protect you from transmission of the virus, but an N95 does. So I'm actually wearing a full-on KN95 respirator outside because you can never be too careful. And the conversation became sort of ridiculous. Like, my understanding, and doctors in the audience might vet this, but if you're vaccinated and you catch the Omicron strain of COVID, you basically have a cold. You're at roughly the same risk that you would be at from a rather severe cold.
And you're outside.
Coronaviruses are... Yeah, no, but however you catch Omicron, like, coronaviruses are an ancient enemy of man. That's why this is COVID-19. But if you want to protect against any strain of COVID, if you think of COVID in the way you perhaps think of gluten, it's just a generic bad, the way to protect against Omicron is the KN95 respirator. So I think in a lot of the cities, people took that turn one way or another. Either you decided this was getting insane and you would risk the cold, or you'd already gotten Omicron. This was a lot of my leftist friends and exes and so on down the line in the big cities. They'd just gotten it. They felt terrible. I did everything right. And then, you know, they just went back to normal life. But that's one path. And then you essentially return to normalcy and the anxiety fades. But the other is that you intensify. You take whatever steps are needed to protect against Omicron COVID outdoors. So I think that for many of my own left-leaning friends, wearing the mask has become almost a symbol of sort of upper middle class safetyism or something like that. And a lot of people have started saying very openly in major articles, the Times ran one the other day, that it'll be hard getting people out of the mask because the mask has become so much a symbol of what you are. I'm a city kid. I am not poor. I care about others. Even though there's absolutely no risk if you now have natural immunity from Omicron and you've also been vaccinated, you're facing the same danger everyone does every flu season.
Right.
That, by the way, is another extension of this. I don't want to keep rambling. But when you point this out to people and say, well, you're at the same risk that you would be from flu or very severe cold, the response is now increasingly, I notice, becoming, well then, if anyone has flu or very severe cold, they should wear masks. We should normalize masking every winter in every urban area. You can never be too safe. So you're seeing the heartland go one way, okay, we got the vax, most of the time it's done. And you're seeing the big cities, the blue cities, go the other way, respirators if necessary, just one life, put those kids outside. And it is very univariate. Obviously, sitting outside eating lunch in the rain in Detroit isn't safe. But COVID is the risk that's worried about.
Shamika, what were you going to say?
Yeah. I was just going to say here, they're still making the kids play sports in their mask indoors.
Where's that?
So like basketball. I'm in Durham, North Carolina. And the governor has asked for them to get rid of masks by March 7th. But our first Black female mayor has said that she's not going to listen to that because we want to be safe, and she's going to continue to extend the mask mandate for the city. So I just think it's terrible that, you know, kids are having to play in masks, and now they are asking you to wear those KN95s because they're supposed to be safer. And it's just really ridiculous at this point.
It's extremely unsafe to play. I think we're mostly former athletes. To play basketball or football, like a contact sport, in a KN95 is not a healthy thing to do. I mean, a lot of kids are asthmatics, so on down the line. But
yeah, it doesn't make sense at all. But Karol.
Yeah, my daughter struggled as an asthmatic playing basketball in a mask.
But Karol, back to the kids. Early on, if you want to give them the benefit of the doubt and say they didn't really know, right? They were trying to play this by ear. So now we're 3, 4, 5 months down the line. We've been studying this. You've been working on the vaccine and all that stuff. It seemed, I don't remember when it first became part of the conversation, but I know it was late. And you probably wrote some things about this too, how no one, my thing right at the start though, was like, we need to take this seriously. We need to find out, what we do know and what the risks are. But we need to do a cost benefit analysis. Like Will talked about, freedom having a value, but there's also, a risk to having your kids, especially young kids like ours, wearing masks all day, the young kids who are still learning and developing, kindergarten, pre-K, first grade, learning how to read, not being able to read lips, not being able to make friends, things of that nature. When do you remember the first serious person, mainstream, talking about that as something else to combat?
Yeah,
wearing the mask and all that stuff. Because I think it was pretty late in the game.
I'm trying to think. I don't even, except for people who are sort of the pro-normal voices on COVID, I'm not even sure I've heard it still. I look at David Leonhardt at the New York Times, and the joke about him is that he's sort of the pro-sanity voice there, but he's not that pro-sanity. But he delivers the message to the New York Times readers that the rest of us knew a year ago. That's his role there. He'll say, perhaps children shouldn't be masked because, they're not major vectors of this, and they're the lowest risk segment of the population, etc. But I haven't heard anybody say that masking might lead to problems, other than kind of people on the right generally.
Right. That's shocking. That is absolutely shocking to me. I mean, it seems so, I'm not a doctor, but it seems so common sense to me that, maybe not a high school kid. It can affect anyone, without a doubt. I'm not dismissing that. But if you're between 3 and 8, right, and you're masking all day, whatever, health risk that may cause, but you can't have the same interactions. The teachers are yelling at you to stay away from each other, right? You can't really have play dates because your best friend's mom is a mandate moron. So she won't let you anywhere near them. So now you're isolated from your friends. You're trying to learn to read. You get kids talking about, I don't know what my teacher's face looks like. And Karol and I have something in common. I was talking about my son at his age, because he's basically at the age where he started school during COVID. So unlike your, 9-year-old and over who can go harken back and say, you go to your kid and you say, well, what's different? Well, when I was in kindergarten and first grade, we used to do this, but now, because of COVID, they won't allow us to do this. My kid had nothing to compare to. It's I don't know. I guess this is just the normal. Yeah. So I was talking to parents in New York, know they're leftists, so, I couldn't get into the political thing. So the way I framed it to make them question it was, so your kids, same age as mine, so been in, school only through COVID, wear masks all day. They have nothing to compare to, so they can't come home and say what's different. And because of COVID, they don't let you into school. So they don't know what's different. You don't know what their desks look like. You don't even know if they have desks. They could be chained to a radiator somewhere because they won't let you into school. And you're just okay with that. And then the parents were thinking, I was like, I didn't think about that. Maybe we should reach out to the PTA, to reach out to the school to see if they can let us in at night so we can walk through the classroom. That was their solution.
Oh my God.
Right. So, we got the mask problem, but there's also development problems. There's also isolation problems, suicide, depression. I didn't hear very few, and I read a lot of stuff like you said. I saw very few people saying, well, we should at least consider that. Maybe COVID's worse, all right, but we should consider it. They would just put on a mask and don't leave the house.
Yeah.
Right. And so you were going to tell me something that your kid said to you too, right?
So sidebar to what you were just saying was, yes, it's true that it's harder on smaller children to wear the mask, but there's going to also be a giant problem of anxiety among teenagers who have learned to hide their faces and want to now. They're like, why would I want to show my hideous face? Teenagers in general are kind of messed up in that way. And the masks have allowed them to hide, and they don't want to give that up. But what I was going to say was, when we moved to Florida, so I have a 6-year-old like Charles. In New York, he was in first grade. So he had not been maskless since pre-K. But in Florida, it's a different cutoff, so he's back in kindergarten. So I visit his class. So that's another thing. So his teacher invites readers to come in and read to the class. I am number one, raising my hand, so excited. I come into the class and I read his class a book, which, when is that going to happen in New York? 2030? Like, I can't even imagine that. But among other things, among them, in addition to them being maskless, they sit on a rug and it's called circle time, something that we used to just think of as a normal part of childhood does not exist anymore in New York City. Kids are not allowed to leave their desks. They have to be separated at all time. They cannot mix together at all. They can't huddle on on the rug and read a book together. None of that. So I say this in front of the teacher, and I'm like, wow, they go to the rug? And she's like, yeah, why? And I was like, whoa, he hasn't been on the rug. And my son finishes my sentence and says, since pre-K. He remembered that rug time. He remembered that he had at one time mixed with his friends.
Like 2 weeks.
And he hadn't done that in so long. He hadn't done that in years. And it was, kind of crazy that he did remember what normal life had been like before this all began. And, gets to have it again.
Yeah. Go ahead, Shamika.
Now, I saw a 7-month-old in a mask this week, and I thought that was just crazy. And I've been seeing a lot of people, be double masked now, even vaccinated people. And so I do think it's going to be hard to get people out of the mask. I was sitting at the gas station last night, and I looked beside me, and there was a woman. Not only was she in the car by herself, masked, but she had it clamped around her nose with her glasses on top of it. And I was just thinking, lady, who are you protecting yourself from? You're in the car alone. And I don't even understand the mental, what is happening with people that they actually think this is a sane thing to do. You're in the car alone. What are you doing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
From a data perspective, actually, the wildest thing about this is that the more vaccinated people are, the more scared they are of COVID.
Yeah.
And it's actually possible as an adult to be pissed off at both ends of this graphic, right? So there are people that are not vaccinated at all and don't have natural immunity and aren't worried about COVID at all. And I don't hate on that too much, but still, these are mostly young men. It's mostly Republicans and black men. And the attitude is just like, what the hell, everybody died. And the social activity for this group never dropped off at all. So that's one extreme. On the other extreme,
for the fact that they're killing half of America.
Yeah, but I mean, those are the people that are actually putting others at COVID risk. Like, what do you do about COVID? Bro, nothing. So there's that group. And then on the other extreme, you have people that are vaccinated 2 to 4 times, and not to stereotype, but this is mostly liberal, urban, white women, but that are absolutely terrified of COVID, that believe that they are at very high risk of dying, that are still staying at home, that are having others deliver all their goods. So the logical reality to some extent with this or any other dangerous disease is that when you get vaccinated or you get natural immunity, that's the point where you return to normal life. That's what people have always done with diseases. Diseases and even plagues aren't something new. But with COVID, you see this weird politicized spectrum on both ends. So that is something real. I guarantee that, first of all, I also bet you could pick out her ethnicity, her social class, even the type of car she was driving. But I guarantee you that woman with the glasses over the 2 masks was double vaccinated. And that's what's so odd about this.
Maybe triple, because, you can get more vaccinations now.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's got at least 1 booster. Yeah, good correction, guys.
Right,
Yeah,
I saw someone on.
She's been in the clinic.
I saw something on Twitter today where somebody was tweeting about how it's time to ease up the mask things, and we need to do something about it. And this woman replied, well, they were like, I'm pissed off the kids are still wearing masks. And the reply was, well, I'm pissed off that some unvaccinated, unmasked idiot gave my mother-in-law COVID and killed him. So my first response wasn't like, some people were being pretty harsh and all that stuff. My thing was just like, how do you know?
Yeah.
How do you know who gave your mother-in-law? Did you track him down and have him arrested? How do you know? So you might as well just add, as Will said, you might as well just add to your list of descriptors. Might as well just add black man to it. You should have said unvaccinated, unmasked black man if you want to play the stereotypes. I mean, it's ridiculous. So you think that woman is ever going to think it's okay for kids to take masks off? Of course not, right? So unfortunately, those are the people who are in charge. And I don't see how this changes in the areas where, like I think in some of these areas, I believe, I was shocked. My son doesn't go to school when he comes here. Mm-hmm. But, I think the kids in South Carolina are still wearing masks in school. So they don't wear masks anywhere else, which makes it even worse. It'd be different. At least New York can say, well, we're crazy. We make you wear masks everywhere. But here in South Carolina, you don't wear masks outside, indoors, restaurants, anywhere, no vaccination passes, none of that stuff, but they're still wearing them in school. So I don't know when that's going to really lapse, especially in Chicago, LA, and New York, and places like that. So, I don't see how that happens, right? But Carol, you write about this stuff, and you see the difference there. Now I'm assuming they're not wearing masks in Florida where you are?
They have not seen their masks since we landed in Florida. Like, literally, I don't know where the masks are. We're going to have to find them for an upcoming New York trip.
Next time you fly?
Like, they're under a bed somewhere? I have no idea. Like, no idea.
Wow. That is so awesome. So you talk...
So great.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's just so freeing and normal, and
How did your kids take the mask though when they went from one to the other? How did they take it?
Really well, very excitedly, and they look again. It wasn't easy leaving New York, and we still have a lot of family there and friends. And for them, especially my older two, leaving friends, established friends groups, and things like that was really hard. And so the idea of they can be free here and not wear a mask was a big plus that they looked forward to. My middle son, was just constantly getting into arguments at school about his mask because all his little friends would be like, pick up your mask, it's under your nose. And he would just, he wrote himself a fake doctor's note saying that he had a condition called oxygenitis and he was allowed to not wear a mask. And he came home and he's like, it worked. And I was like, what worked? How could it work? How your teacher read your note? And he's like, no, my note wasn't for the teacher. It was for the other kids, so.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't even think about that, because my son's the same as your youngest. Now, it was weird. One of the ancillary benefits of South Carolina. So we're in New York, we're going through the mask. They were wearing it for a few months. And so I was like, if something told me this is 6 weeks in, I was like, they're going to get tied to this. I need to break him from it. So whenever he went outside, I tell him to take it off. Whenever he wasn't in school, tell him to take it off. And he was just like, no, right?
Yeah.
I'll tell you the crazy thing about it is really going to piss you all off. I didn't find out till later. He's at the age where he just volunteers stuff. He doesn't know he's doing it. He's just telling you stuff. So he was like, no. So he walks a block and a half home from school. And he walked home like this one day because I took his mask from him, right? So he was all like, I got to wear the mask, So we take our first trip to South Carolina. And we get here, and no one's wearing masks, right? So he sees that, and it was just like flow. He didn't make a conversation. He didn't ask why they weren't wearing masks. He wasn't afraid. It's just like the masks were the norm in New York. Once that became the norm, he never bothered to put it on, right? So he was fine. So he's walking around. We put him in camps. The camps, no mask. The counselors, no mask. So it's like, in New York, in places where they eased the mask mandate, the customers are not wearing masks, but a lot of the servers and all that kind of stuff are wearing masks. But here, nobody was wearing masks, right? So he was fine with it. But then he goes back to New York, and now so we had that issue where he kept having to go back and forth, which kind of, made him, but it eased his anxiety, which was good. But the crazy thing was, one of the time we were talking, and he was saying something about school. I said, well, what did they tell you about COVID? They basically, he was in kindergarten at the time. They played him videos. So they're basically fear mongering, right? So they're telling him stuff like, Because I'm like, why is he 5 and he's talking about germs? But they were playing them videos about what COVID could do. And, he said, he's 5, he's telling me what bacteria is like. I mean, why would you be showing these videos to 5-year-olds? So no wonder they're all paranoid. So then you're going to have that. You're going to have these kids. I'm surprised your kids, and you're lucky that your kids have that approach. But some of these are going to be like, no, my teacher told me that they'll turn these kids into little, people like them, the little paranoid people. And they're going to be like, I don't want to take my mask off.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the other thing I think you were, that one benefit for you, I think, leaving New York as much as you love it, you came here because of what they were doing to the kids. But I don't know how much you're going to still write on it since you know New York so well. But I don't know if you realize, well, you haven't been gone that long, so it was happening when you were there. But you escaped a bit of a spike in crime.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right, but particularly random crime on the streets. Like, I think you're probably still there then, because from the summer of last year to like November, end of October, every week a woman was getting punched in the head and pushed down the stairs on the subway.
Yep.
Now they stab, though. Now lately it's been stabbings every day.
Yeah. So like 2 weekends ago or something, my 12-year-old daughter was like, jokingly saying something bad about Florida, maybe about their Chinese food or something like that. And I was like, 6 people were stabbed in the subway this weekend. So in your beloved New York, and this is just a thing that's happening now. But that brings me to like this point that so many conservatives say things to me like, New York has always sucked. Like, why? What took you so long, basically? And I say New York was amazing. It was amazing. You're so wrong. Our crime was super low. We had this like incredible period of low crime where everything was going so well. And it was, it was 8 years of Giuliani followed by 12 years of Bloomberg. That's a long time for things to relatively improve. And so this decline is so depressing because it's so rapid, and it undoes so much of what made New York great and such a great place to live. And nobody seems to take it seriously. Like, so when I talk about it now, or even when I talked about it when I lived there, I talked about the increasing crime a lot. I got comments like, that I shouldn't be talking about it because it's like against New York. And like, I want New York to be its best self. I'm not going to move back. It doesn't matter if they get rid of masks tomorrow and everything is sunshine and roses again. I root for New York to become the way it was, and the safe, happy, normalish place it was to live. And I don't understand how New York is going to do that if they can't face reality of what's going on. And the reality is just so important, and so many New Yorkers don't want to hear it.
One of the most shocking things that I've heard, I don't know if you've seen some of the people, this weird approach to the crime in New York. So you talked about, the Giuliani and the Bloomberg years, and I think crime was relatively low for the city. But obviously it was much higher before that, much higher than it is now in the late 70s and early 80s. Mm-hmm. And I'm actually seeing people from New York act like it's a poker game or some, video game. It's like, I built up this cachet. I'm playing with the house money now, right? I'm gambling. I came in with $10. I got 1,000. So if I lose 500, I'm still up. So it's no big deal. They're like, so what? You're being unfair. Look at it in 1992. It's way less than it was then. So crime is low. So now that you got it down, I don't care if it was 1,000 murders in 1989. Right. If it was 200 for 7 years, why are you okay? Your argument of it going from 200 to 500 in 1 year is that, hey, at least it's not 1989. That's senseless. And I see this argument on a regular basis. Have you seen any of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have friends in law enforcement in New York City who are like, but the decline did not happen overnight. It was like years and years of crime going down slowly. It wasn't like, boom, one day the crime rate dropped. But I feel like they don't get that they're undoing years and years of improvements in such a short period of time. It's really, and the fact that it happened during COVID, where people were indoors and really not out a lot, and crime started to go up, and everybody was like, this is no big deal. To me, that was such a big deal, because it was like we weren't even back to a functioning society and crime was going up. And I still think of it like that. The problem is that those two things kind of go hand in hand. And if they don't move on from COVID, they will not be able to fight crime. Like the subways have this high crime element right now because no one's riding them. And it's a cyclical problem that needs solving. And I don't see anybody in charge solving it.
Any wonderful crime stats you want to give us, Will?
Yeah, I mean, like, all joking aside, well, first of all, the basic reality here isn't all that complicated. When you pull back sort of civilizational services, kind of police in the street, that kind of thing, crime increases. This is something that the highbrow left in the USA fights really hard against admitting. And you saw this against Giuliani and Bratton in specifically New York and Mayor Daley in my hometown against Chicago for many, many years. But it's one of the least complicated, most obvious relationships in social science. I mean, just in one sentence, between 1963 and 1993, when you had the move toward community policing, when you had Miranda, Escobedo, fruit of the poison tree and drug cases, so on, crime increased 500%. Murders went from about 8,000 a year to about 25,000 a year. So when you had broken windows policing, CompStat policing in the 90s, all that really was people cracking down on crime and returning to what the order used to be. Like the famous example in New York was the squeegee men and the open prostitutes in Times Square and all that stuff being chased off the streets. And, as someone who's traveled to other big cities, it used to be entertaining to see that. But walking your kid home from school, you don't want parades of yapping hookers screaming at you and homeless people hustling you for money every couple steps and so on down the line. And I've told you guys this before on the show. Like, I grew up in Center City, Chicago, in Wicker Park and Bridgeport during that kind of that one movie kids era, where you would get on the train with your skateboard and you would see people on the train like painting graffiti, or like having sex in the back, or like walking through hustling candy bars to like get my team to the playoffs, but they were 49. So controlling that in the cities is what brought back stability. It's what made the cities livable for that middle class tax base again. A final thing about this, one of the things we get criticized for on Cut the Bull is making this same sort of point about, for example, the black community or the urban white community, that obviously crime is a problem. Or drug addiction is a problem. Fatherlessness is a problem. So there seems to be this idea that if something's going on with a group that you're friendly with, and we love all those groups, you shouldn't point it out.
Yeah.
You should kind of totally keep it in-house, keep it very low, maybe not say it at all, because if you say it, they'll know. But the reality is that we've all been dating and sleeping with and playing ball with one another in this country in the North since like 1950. Everybody knows. Everybody knows there's a lot of crime in Chicago. So the question is not how can you disguise that. People in New York make fun of the crime in Chicago. The question is not how can you disguise that. It's sort of how can you fix it. And that's an important distinction between kind of the public face of a weak leader and what a strong one actually attempts to do.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I've read Carol's columns of good work. Obviously, there's no secret that many, many cities, including New York, including Chicago, went back to 1994 homicide levels over the past 2 years. And you can't just ignore that. If you want to say Black Lives Matter, what do you think the ethnicity of 50+% of those dead people was?
I remind people there was a weekend in July in 2020 when there was a high number of shootings in New York, and every single victim was Black or Hispanic. 100% of them. They're the lives that matter.
Not one Irish or Italian guy? No diversity?
Nope. Maybe there was one shooter they didn't mention, but every victim.
Yeah.
We didn't get a break from the victims. But, and then the craziest thing is, at least, I don't hold out much hope for Eric Adams, but I will give him this. He did stop from de Blasio, and his people were saying, as crime going up, there's no problem. Right. What are you talking about? There's no problem. Yeah, I know this is the 75th woman being punched in the face, but the subway is safe. And how long do you think people are going to believe that? But they kept saying it. But at least he's not vocalizing that. I mean, I don't think his solutions are really that, but hey, at least give him credit for not saying it's not happening. Yeah. Now he's in trouble for making the homeless move or whatever. We'll see what happens with that. But I think I want to leave with a little.
Eric Adams is actually a good pro-police mayor. He just seems to be a racist.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he's had all these comments about white people and women, and so
Crackers, actually.
his position on policing is rock solid. I mean,
well, I don't know, but then he did turn around and say the reason why you are reporting poorly on New York is because I'm black. As if, and then I saw somebody tweet, it made me laugh. I don't usually, I read stuff and I'm like, I'm not going to waste my time, but I had to because somebody tweeted, well, he does have a point because now that he's black mayor, they're talking about the crime in New York. But you never heard anybody say anything about de Blasio. No, specifically, you never heard Fox News say anything bad about de Blasio.
Yeah.
Tucker literally called him the first he was the country's worst mayor, then he was worst mayor ever.
Yeah,
I've been on
Tucker talking about de Blasio. So, and I was on Tucker last summer. I guess so last summer talking about Eric Adams, and Tucker was very optimistic about him. And
he was wrong, but he was.
I think Adams is a good mayor. I just think he's a racist. Like,
no, he's
Eric
going to suck,
Adams
Will. I'm sorry. I tried for a couple of weeks. He's going to suck.
Adams is one of those guys like Donald Trump that should just kind of shut up. Like, after the racist comments, he went on this rant about vegetarianism.
Don't even get me started with that. No, they forced Friday.
Hey, homie, I eat a plant-based diet. Like, just
Friday's Vegan Friday now.
What?
Yeah, the school's a Vegan Friday because, he's like, you should be a vegan. I am. And then, wait, but here's the best part. In typical politician fashion, 3 days later, he's like, all right, sometimes I eat fish.
Right.
So
look, the man may be a vegan and a racist, but the cops like it. We have to see what he does on crime.
My daughter's theater team was supposed to come there in June, I believe, and now I'm nervous. Don't know if I want her to come.
Well, I don't think they forced the tourists to eat vegan. Right. Now you might get stabbed and punched in the head.
Right.
That might be a problem. Okay, I want to end on this. I got a quiz for each of you. I want to know, I need a prediction. I need to know from each of you. I'll let the guests go last, but so I'll start with you, Will. Where do you see COVID going? You can say nationally, from a federal level. What do you think most of the states are going to do in response to the mask and the vaccine mandates and all that stuff? 6 months to a year. Will New York and Chicago and LA still be asking for the card? Will they still be masking on the divvy bikes? What do you think?
Okay. Yeah, I'll give two opinions. I mean, first of all, as someone who, banter aside, teaches methods at a pretty solid state university, I think all of this stuff since vaccination has been stupid pantomime and kabuki theater. I mean, if you are vaccinated and you have the Omicron strain of COVID specifically, you have the flu. If you're looking at like the IFR of what it is that you have. One of the things that I've actually been doing for a paper is breaking out, we've talked about the vaccine on the show and we've made fun of it, myocarditis and all that. But the simple reality is that last year it looks like we lost about 400,000 unvaccinated people. Again, mostly in that quote-unquote brothers and rednecks category. And about 26,000 vaccinated people. So now that we have these tools, and obviously, by the way, I think you have the right to risk your life. If you are a healthy young person and you say, I don't want any of these potential heart problems, I'm not going to take this.
Healthy and young,
and
they don't even force old and sick people to take medicine.
No, but that's exactly right. But what I'm saying is that I'm going to say this very openly because we're getting a pretty large audience. If you're 60, you should take the COVID vaccine. Like, you are in the risk demographic for COVID-19. Mm-hmm. But the simple reality is that now that we know the risk demographic for COVID-19, we have a vaccine, I don't see much point to any other measures. Kids are at very low risk for COVID. The whole kids thing is simply a way to guilt people. It's just more of this pantomime stuff. 700 kids all time have died of COVID-19. Also, a couple major Israeli and Brit papers, kids don't transmit COVID-19 to other people. So all of that's just BS. That's just nonsense. Now, that's what we should do. What we should do is open up fully and encourage but not mandate vaccination. I'm a long talker, but that was one sentence. What will we do? I'd say at least 6 more months of stupid, pointless virtue signaling. The Democrats will run on being the party that tried to save as many lives as possible in the face of white supremacy, going into 2020. They're going to suffer a historic ass-kicking. And I think that might jar some things loose. Like seeing 30% of blacks and 50% of Hispanics vote Republican in, about half the states, which is something we might see. I think that might change the game a little bit. But they're going down to the wire. You're still, even right now, you're hearing about climate change, you're hearing about COVID-19, you're hearing about white supremacy. So they're sticking with the playbook. It got them this far. It took them to the Super Bowl. Now can they beat the Rams? No.
And Will, let me leave you with your wonderful mayor that you support outside of his racism. He's backpedaled, but he was toying with mandating boosters.
I mean, if you're asking me about that, so there's a great book that I read when I was a sales executive, the 80-20 principle. It's actually more like the 90-10 principle if you look at the actual facts involved. But in any competitive situation, business, war, even love, about 80% of the reward you get comes from the first 10 to 20% of the effort you put out. So simply being in shape and getting vaccinated is what's going to protect you against COVID-19. Getting a third booster shot now that everyone has natural immunity from Omicron, I think you're talking about very, very, very low reduction in risk. I wouldn't mandate that. And I also don't think an urban mayor can mandate something like this. I'm surprised by how few lawsuits there have been around this. But, I think we will see more, stupid shit like that. I think we'll see mayors focusing on more and more mandates every 6 months. Pharma certainly encourages that. Masks will be a debate. When will a lot of this fade? When's the election? November 2022? I think that November the 4th, 2022, especially after a GOP win, we'll see less of this. Riley, prediction.
This is going to be fun. Shamika.
Yeah, I think the jig is up. I think that
Do you really?
a lot of...
Are you hoping the jig is up or you think it's up?
I see a lot of people tired and just not really... Of course, you have those that are still extremely scared, but like Will said, there were a group of people that never really stopped living, and a lot of them, like I still went to parties and cookouts and people hanging out and going to each other's houses. So I think people are just not going to, like, they didn't even do it at the height of COVID. They're really not going to do it now that they feel like they're protected or that people are vaccinated or they've already had it. I really don't think they're going to do it. And I think as we move closer to elections, you're going to have a lot of these politicians saying, getting scared and nervous and saying we need to get rid of these mandates and, let's do away with the mask. I was really surprised when I heard our governor here, who is a Democrat, saying we need to get rid of this by March 7th. I don't know what the date of March 7th is and why so many people seem to be choosing that particular day. But I think people are realizing that it's not going to go well for them when the election comes. Now, I wouldn't be shocked if we go into the day after election and all of a sudden cases are rising again and they need to do something else. But I think people are tired and just not going to continue to go along with this foolishness, especially after the Super Bowl when you saw everyone there, all the celebrities were without their mask and just living their best lives. A lot of people want to just live their best life. And I think people are still wearing the mask to just virtue signal or because they don't have the guts not to. I went to my uncle's funeral on Tuesday, and I said me and him were the only people in the place that were free. So, me and the corpse, we decided to be without our masks.
Shamika. And to our illustrious guest, Karol, what is your prediction?
So I think we're not done with, I guess mine is going to be the most pessimistic because I think what's going to happen is we're in this endemic phase of COVID, and I think we're going to see more variants. And in the summer, so I think that these areas will drop their mask mandates in the next month, 2 months, 3 months. I think places like New York probably will do it later. But in the summer, when the South goes through the unexpected spike that it went through last summer, the news will again ramp up the hysteria and say that these Southern governors aren't behaving correctly. They're not encouraging vaccination enough. They're not encouraging masking. And then when it comes back around to the Northeast will have no choice but to do what they believe is now the right thing to do, which is mask up, vaccine mandates again. I see it being a cycle for a little while, at least one more cycle, if not more.
Well, unfortunately, I think I got you beat. I'm the most pessimistic. I think some of the states will relinquish their hold. The ones who are already, like Shamika said, announcing March 7th, March whatever. Mm-hmm. The ones who haven't by the second week of March won't, because the way they'll spin it is, we might as well finish the school year. So then they'll get there. After this school year, wait and see, and then we'll probably start to fall. Hoping in the back of their minds that by the fall they can get another variant so they can start it back. I think in certain areas like New York and Chicago and places like that, schools, now they'll, in some of the other mandates and such, schools are probably going to be wearing it until our kids' age, Carol, are graduating. They're going to walk across the stage with a mask on. They're going to continue to ask for a card at restaurants for I don't know how long. I say at least 3 years. So I think I'm the most pessimistic. I think it's going to last. But now the areas that have been easing are going to continue to ease. But that's, 60% of the country. I think the other 30 to 40% will keep on like COVID business as usual. Mm-hmm. I don't see any reason why they would change. Will has a rebuttal. Go ahead.
No, I was thinking about whether or not to reply, but I think you're probably right. But also, as someone that moved from, a huge city to another huge city that no one talks about, I think it's important to remember how marginal the group we think of as the national leadership team really is. Like, very often, and Carol might have a similar perspective, moving from New York to that desolate heartland of Central Florida. I'm sure there are a few cities, New York, LA, Chicago, probably the smallest of these, maybe Detroit and the hipster areas, that are going to continue with this for a while. But the huge majority of the country, just like the huge majority of the country is teaching the 1776 Unites curriculum as versus 1619, is not going to do any of this for more than a few more weeks. So I think there's going to be this weird monoculture of urban, liberal, rich people that are going to be masking and double boosting and so on, and occasionally wandering out into the bright light of the rest of the country and looking around in befuddlement. And this will go on for 4 or 5 years. But the simple reality is that the cities that are growing and that are far outpacing a lot of these, Phoenix, Arizona, and so on, aren't going to be doing any of this.
No, you're right.
So
I think that's the key. I think what's going to force those other cities to do it.
Voted for like Walter Mondale. Yeah, I think you're right.
No, you're right. I think what's going to force the other cities to do it will be when enough people leave that it's not a tipping point. I think that's going to be the catalyst to make them stop. We're losing enough people and we're losing tax dollars. We better jump on this quick. That's what's going to change.
Yeah. Well, that's also
one thing that I will.
Sorry, I was going to just say that Charles said that New York is going to continue masking and vaccine mandates for a long, long time. I actually think they're going to drop the vaccine mandates way before they drop the masks because they're being hurt. Tourism is hurting. And there's places in the world where kids don't even have a kid's vaccine and they cannot visit New York City. And that's crazy. My 5-year-old is invited to a friend's birthday, a 6-year-old is invited to a friend's birthday party, at Chuck E. Cheese in New York City while we happen to be visiting. And he can't go because he's not vaccinated. And, it's a child's birthday party. And so I think that they're going to let go of the vaccine mandate for tourist reasons way before they give up the mask.
I think another difference there, just still having a lot of friends in that category back home, is that you can see a mask. I think people are going to use the mask as a symbol of I care for a while. And like watching people on Twitter, I don't really have a problem with it. I like trade darts with every so often, like Jennifer Gunter, the writer, the Vagina Manifesto or whatever. I mean, like, people are talking about, like, where can we buy colorful, pretty KN95s? Because we're going to be wearing these for the next 5 years. Even if they tell us not to, there's going to be an underground. I mean, I really think this is going to be a thing. This is going to be a symbol. And, like, every flu season, people are going to trot these out. Yeah. But, again, that's going to happen in 5 megacities. And in the rest of the country, Houston, Texas, and Louisville, Kentucky, and Miami, Florida, and places where you can also find a pretty good margarita, people are going to think this is just a damn joke. And that's where a lot of business is going to get done in the near future. Last comment, I'm actually genuinely worried as a Louisvillian that people from the blue megacities are going to start migrating here and voting the way they used to. That's the issue. Are people going to start moving to Kentucky and Texas and voting for Democrats and mask mandates?
I honestly don't think so. I know that it gets said a lot, especially about like Florida, about Texas.
Texas?
I don't think so. I think the people that are escaping right now, yes, Texas had a migration before COVID, but I think the COVID kind of migration is different. I think these people have learned a very valuable lesson, and so I don't think so. You know.
Well, I guess we'll leave it there. I hope you're right. I hope Will's more right. I hope I'm wrong. I don't trust these people, but something's going to break them. But Karol Markowicz, she is the columnist for the New York Post and Fox News, contributing editor at the Spectator, and contributing writer at the Washington Exaaminer. Karol, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. God get all of the praise. I got a country to save, 'cause I'm Patriot J and I'm saving the day.